Welcome, everyone, to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. Thank you for joining us. Workplace, workforce, marketplace trends is the focus of the show, as you likely already know. Our guest this week is Connor Lokar. Connor's been on the show before. Connor is an economist with ITR Economics. I know Connor from a number of the events that he and I attend together, the Marine Leadership Alliance. And he has been a featured speaker there for the past 5 or 6 years, and I've been the MC there for about the same amount of time. Connor has become a darling of the group because of his very candid and straightforward approach to economics. He comes very well prepared for the MLA. And I had him on the show in the fall. And after the show was over, he said, hey, let's regather at the new year and talk about what's happened since the election. This was before the election. Let's talk about what's happened since the election and see if any of our predictions around the economy are correct. Wow. What has happened since the election? As I sit here, it's March the 13th recording this show, and our world is crazy. And we'll talk to Connor about that and what it means for the predictions of the economy. Connor, by the way, and perhaps we'll reference this in the show, has his second child on the way. Sometime between now and when I see him in late April at the MLA conference at the Broadmoor in Colorado Springs, he will have had that child if all goes well. What kind of world is he bringing that child in? The alliances that the United States has always known are deteriorating rapidly. The democracy that the United States has known in our lifetime is, one could say, deteriorating rapidly. What type of world will that child know? It's crazy out there. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of wonder. There's still plenty of people that think our current president, Donald Trump, know what he's doing. They give him extraordinary amounts of business credibility for the decisions that he's making, regardless of his checkered background in the past of business success. They still think their guy knows what he's doing. And you could perhaps tell by my comments and my tone of voice, I'm on the other side of that argument. Let's let the economist weigh in. One of the things that ITR Economics boasts is accuracy. And Connor has begun every presentation to the Marine Leadership Alliance talking about ITR's spot-on accuracy with the economy. We'll ask him how that's going with ITR, and then we'll begin conversations about the economy. You will recall, if you've listened to this show in the past with Connor, if you listened to Connor's episode in the past, his company, ITR Economics, makes some dire predictions about the year 2030 and what the combination of rampant national spending and demographics is going to do to our nation. They have called for, and they're famous for this, they have called not for a recession in 2030-ish, but a depression. And one can't help but wonder if the decisions being made today, the reflections in the stock market, the dissolutions of the alliances, the tariffs, has accelerated Connor and ITR Economics' call for a depression in the year 2030. Maybe it's going to begin in 2026, 2025, 2026, as we're recording this. Somewhere right in the near future, is this going to happen? So I hate to be Chicken Little, but let's see what Connor has to say about this. We'll be right back after this break, this short break. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. Upcoming, Connor Lokar on the other side of a Zoom call. This is Cam Marston. Poor communication is costing your business, and it's because many leaders don't have the skills to communicate well. Productivity's sinking, and you're losing sales. Teams are frustrated. So I created the Generational Insights Communications Academy to train leaders to communicate effectively with anyone in any situation. Fix communication breakdowns, build the company you deserve. Enroll your leaders today at cammarston.com/GICA. We're back. You're listening to What's Working. On the other side of a Zoom call once again is Connor Lokar. Connor's with the ITR Economics Group out of the Northeast somewhere. Is it New Hampshire, Connor?
New Hampshire, yep, Southern New Hampshire. We've got folks all over the country, but once upon a time we were all here, but in this post-COVID remote work world, we've got people everywhere now, but still a good chunk of us here in New Hampshire.
Yeah, post-COVID work world. We've seen that anniversary come up recently. Perhaps we could get into that content as well. Anyway, for those of you, you can remember the conversation I had with Connor back in maybe September and October. He and I agreed to reconnect after this. Connor, let's go back real quick. And it was funny to me that we said, hey, there's still a lot of uncertainty in the marketplace right now because we don't know who's going to be president. We have one president, if we get in, who's very pro-business, and we feel like the grease will hit the gears and the things will begin zooming. If the other person, if she wins, then we don't know what's going to happen. Well, he won. And as we're talking here in mid-March, it's absolutely more chaos and uncertainty than I think any one of us could have predicted. In fact, I'm so bold as to say, if she had won, there would have been more certainty. Let's begin there. How do we read these tea leaves? What do you see going on out there?
Yeah, we really just traded one uncertainty cloud, for another, basically. And it's kind of odd that, tariffs themselves aren't necessarily a surprise just based on the campaign rhetoric from the Trump administration or the Trump campaign, rather, prior to their success in the election. So I can't say that tariffs are a surprise. I think it's just the way that it has gone has been less smooth than I think probably all parties may have envisioned or hoped for.
Did you ever think, so Connor, I've played your interview from the fall to a number of my financial planner friends, and I've said, okay, listen to this. What are the things that would, and I'm talking specifically about the depression that ITR is famous for predicting around the year 2030. And I've said, what are the things that you and I would begin to see, financial advisor, that would suggest this is about to happen? And what are the quick pivot points to make to try to protect ourselves? And I'm thinking personally here, this is my retirement. This is something I've, what can we anticipate and quickly make a change, and what would that change be? And their responses were nearly to a person, Cam, the predictions that they're making will never happen. They'll never let it happen. Who is they? The federal government, the big banks will never let this happen. But I can promise you that when you and I were talking back in September, these same people, financial advisors, would never have predicted that there are people in the United States calling for the aggressive annexation of Canada. Mm-hmm. I mean, everything normal is off the table. Everything predictable is off the table. So we've gotten into an extraordinary amount of uncertainty, and the way that the tariffs have happened have been aggressive and mean. I mean, that's a silly schoolboy's term to use, but mean. And I want to know what that's going to do to us.
Well, it's whether it's tax or trade or tariffs or, businesses can make money under any administration, under different sets of policy that they may not like. But they need to know what those are. Like they just need to know what the chessboard is going to look like, and then they can navigate their way around it. And the problem right now is, the pieces are, strewn across the board. They're moving by the day. The corny joke I've been using the last, few weeks, it's like, the dumb weather joke. It's like, well, if you don't like the weather, just, wait till tomorrow. It's
exactly.
Like, well,
yeah.
If you don't like the current tariffs, just wait till tomorrow. And because it's changing at that rapid of a pace. And that's kind of, because like in a vacuum, with most government policy, almost all, it's, typically there are good intentions behind it. So if we think about like what the well-intended outcomes of tariffs are, in a vacuum, right? It's like we're going to, continue to incent, the, American manufacturing renaissance and the on and reshoring of production back to the U.S., which will create opportunities for the American worker. It will drive a more resilient U.S. supply chain. It'll come with the bonus of, some additional tariff revenue to the federal government as a funding source. It will, we can use these tariffs as a means of leverage to extract a more, equitable trading relationship with our partners as it relates to their tariffs on our products. So like all things like in a vacuum, like on a questionnaire, people would be like, yeah, I'd sign up for all that. That
sure.
really good. But with all government policy, the devil's always in the unintended details, and some of the unintended byproducts of this. And I cautioned as much. In the lead up is retaliation. It's obviously deteriorating relationships with our trading partners. It is ultimately inflation in some pockets of the economy. So it's you can't grade government policy based on intention. You have to grade it based on outcome, which is quite often messier and often wrought with some of those negative externalities that can come along with it. So I think the challenge so far in the last 6 weeks is like, we kind of haven't picked a lane. We're kind of straddling the yellow lines as it is, like, because we're already getting all the negatives. Like I think public sentiment in Canada as it relates to their view of the United States is like plummeted like 50 points.
It's awful. Aggressively angry.
Canada is retaliating, with tariffs of their own, export restrictions. There was the big rub with Ontario and their electricity coming into some of our Great Lakes states. Europe has just announced retaliatory tariffs. We haven't even gotten to tariffing Europe yet. So we're already basically reaping the negatives, but we haven't necessarily again, it's like we were a day away from Canada-Mexico tariffs a month ago. Then they were delayed. Then they were in place for a day, and then they were delayed, and everything under the USMCA was exempt till early next month, which is most of everything. So it's like, we kind of need to pick a lane. Our preference would be the non-escalating global trade war lane.
Yeah.
But if we're going to go with the other lane, we either need to do it or not, because other folks are already responding to just the threat, let alone the action. And again, the lack of clarity is again, if the intent is we're going to get onshoring out of this, well, people that would be making those decisions need some confidence in the duration and durability of these tariffs. It's like, how could I, as an executive, considering some sort of, like a $500 million or a $5 billion, greenfield new investment in the U.S. in this new plant, how could I make that decision based on tariffs if I have no confidence that the tariffs are even going to still be here 24 hours from now? How is that going to work? And so, and if we want to get revenue from tariffs have to go in place and stay there. And, if we want to get concessions out of Canada or Europe or China, I feel like you need to have a specific set of asks of those folks to basically give them an off ramp. And I feel like that has also been a little thin, where I don't know if, our trading partners even know exactly what we're looking for that would qualify as appropriate cooperation to, get us in a de-escalating trend. So
right. It's chaos and it's confusion. Yeah. And do you get the sense, Connor, that the people making these tariff decisions and stop and start tariff decisions out of the White House have a strategy? Are they doing this with a strategy in mind, or is it seat of the pants decision making?
I would, to help me sleep at night, I would hope that there is a method to the madness, and it's some level of 4D chess that I'm currently unable to see.
Well, all the best economists in the world and in the history have not been able to predict. They've never been able to say, "Here's a good strategy. Let's turn it on and off again repeatedly." It's I'm reminded of a scene from I can't think of the movie. Billy Bob Thornton was the lead character. He was kind of a dullard, and he walked up to a lawnmower that wasn't working, and all these men were
Sling Blade.
Yep. All these men were standing around the lawnmower, all of these men who thought they were experts at machines and things like that. And he walked in and immediately determined what the problem was. There's no gas in the tank. Well, it's like we've got all these people standing around the economy, experts and economists and people who have done it before. And Trump has walked in and looked at the machine and said, I know the simple fix to this. And the outcome is different than what we saw in Sling Blade when the machine started working. It makes me terrified. Help me understand this, Connor. And I want to talk to you about whether you've seen an impact on business because of this like I have. So I'm in my hand. You can see this in the Zoom call. I'm holding this pen. Let's assume it comes from Europe, and they've added a 25% tariff to it. To make things simple, The pen costs $1. It now costs $2 because of the tariff. It's an additional $1. Does our federal government get that additional $1? And how does it get into their coffers if so?
Yeah, it does. So there's a data set that we track, which is basically tracking the, aggregate, like kind of like what do we get out of all this? So in the last 12 months, the federal government collected just over $76 billion from tariff collections.
How many months?
In the last 12 months.
12 months.
I think it's like 76.3, maybe. I'll pull it up here off screen while I talk.
Big number.
And again, so there's a lot of confusion on like who pays the tariff, who doesn't pay the tariff. What is the exact effectiveness of the tariff?
How does the money get to the government? Is it a tax? Is it a line item? How do they figure out how much they are owed?
So here, let me just confirm this number here. So yes, 76.3 billion in the last 12 months. So and again, that is the value of tariffs collected by the federal government on imported goods. Right now, and this is that's data before this started. That's data through January, I believe. So presumably that number is going to go up. That's December data, actually, it looks like. So that was like kind of our start point, is $76.3 billion. And that's off of a total nominal dollar value of about just over $1 trillion worth of goods coming into the United States that are subject to some level of tariffs. So, so obviously we import more than anyone on earth of any number of items, whether it's food, beverage, raw materials, finished goods, intermediate goods, blah, 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 blah. Like that total pie is about $1 trillion, and we're pulling about 76 billion off of that in terms of tariff collections because of items that have some various level of duty or levy applied. So, the importer is the one that pays that.
The importer. Okay.
So it's not like the consumer's not paying it, but assuming that through that value chain, that tariff is ultimately, if that price increase and tax essentially rolls downhill.
Yeah.
Like
it's going to be passed along.
Essentially does pay it indirectly.
Yeah.
But it's not like they're paying the tariff to the federal government. Like the government's pulling the tariff. And then at the end of the day, the question is like, does that ultimately mean the product, the pen that you're taking off the shelf or ordering on Amazon or whatever, like, is that ultimately going to end up being more expensive?
Yeah.
So again, it's not like your like Cam's dollars are going to the federal government.
Right.
Your dollars are going to the retailer you're buying the pen from. It's just you may end up paying a higher shelf price.
Right.
Based on this tariff, so that everyone can kind of through the value chain preserve their margin as they pass this on. And again, it's not always like you don't typically see like, just because it's a 25% tariff coming in, that does not automatically mean that you're going to pay 25% higher.
I understand.
At the end of the day, because again, it could be because different folks will try to absorb it. Like the exporter, like say it's coming from Europe, they'll do what they can to try to manage that. There's also currency moves. So if the euro weakens, then some currency depreciation on the export side could diminish the landed value. So it kind of gets watered down on the way through. But there's been the talking point lately is like tariffs are the external revenue service for the government. And, instead of the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, we're looking at the External Revenue Service. But that number, $76 billion, like let's pretend that doubles because of tariffs to $150 billion.
Right.
The federal government in the last fiscal year spent over $7 trillion.
So it's still a drop in a bucket.
So it would, I'll round up and say, okay, tariffs, assuming we double the income, funds the government for a week. We still have 51 others to deal with. So I wouldn't want any of your listeners that, because some folks are maybe excited about the prospect of tariffs. I would not say this will not be your last year dealing with your accountant or TurboTax or whatever your service provider of choice is for tax season, because we're going to start funding everything with tariffs because that's what the government did 150 years ago. Because the math just doesn't work, unless we're also cutting the government by 99%, which
I want to talk about that as well. But
I don't think is feasible. So
let me clarify. I want to make sure that I understand this. There is an importer out there somewhere who's seeing a new line item on these pens that are coming in container ships that is now U.S. tariffs, and they are, in order to get delivery of these pens, they're having to pay this bill that goes directly to the United States Treasury.
Yeah.
Okay. I was always curious of where that money gets, how it gets to the federal government, and it's the importer company that pays that bill. I got it.
I'd have to look it up. I don't know if it specifically goes to the Treasury or the U.S. Trade Commission.
Yeah.
And then that, my civics is not sharp enough at the moment but essentially at the end of the day, it ends up in the government's pocket for them to spend as they see fit elsewhere. Again, it's, and the question is, because our view is, the concern is that it'll be inflationary. And again, the on the import export side, they can try to work the math or Forex or whatever it is to try to ease that. But at the end of the day, businesses need to be profitable to exist. Like I don't think profits are evil. I think they're necessary for business to function. And so again, it's what level of price do they have to take to say, like, what do I now have to sell this at to cover my, landed cost of that imported good? Can the market bear that? So our concern, it's because products are going to fall into two buckets, right, Cam? It's either, bucket number one is like, we're applying tariffs to things that we currently do in fact manufacture in the United States. So like the excitement there would be like, well then, if we wall out export products coming into the US, our domestic incumbents will get more demand. And I have some clients in this bucket. I have some steel product manufacturers that have been plagued for decades with, Chinese dumping in non-competitive, policies, subsidized industry from China. And they verified that with trade cases they've won. But countries are very creative at skirting existing tariffs. They're like, okay, well, we'll just move our production to Vietnam and we'll bring it in, or we'll ship it into Mexico.
Manufacture. You told us this last year. Manufacture it in China, ship it to Vietnam, and then have it come into the U.S. through Vietnam. It's still a Chinese product. Yeah.
And maybe apply some quote unquote value add to it, or just change this. So they could try to skirt that. So like in theory, and so like I like steel product manufacturer, for example, they're excited about this. They're going to be in the winners bucket because of this. And they've already extracted increased volume commitments from customers in recent weeks. And so this is going to help their business. It'll help them employ more Americans. It'll help them probably ultimately have a more profitable year. But bucket number two is we're applying tariffs to things that we do not manufacture domestically, which, again, in theory, because of tariffs, we'll start to do that. But like best case, that'll take weeks to ramp up that production.
Best case would take weeks. You're right.
Yeah.
It's more likely months or years.
Quarters, if not years, to do that. And most realistically, in a lot of cases, we're just not going to, either because there's a lack of confidence in how long are these tariffs going to last. Am I going to start a 3-year build on a plant that'll become operational just in time for
the next administration
to go away potentially? Or again, they might go away halfway through that project build out, or even with tariffs, because of our high labor costs, our tight environmental regs, like, how many new smelting plants are we going to get? Chem processing plants? Like, again, on a questionnaire or like a public polling, everyone's like, I want to produce more in the US. And then till Chevron says, okay, we're going to do a $18 billion project build in your backyard. And then they get destroyed by environmental lawsuits and, that locale basically protesting the very, like, just the insult of even suggesting that you would put that, in my backyard. Kind of thing,
Right.
So what that means is, so bucket number two, we don't make it here, in the interim, possibly for longer than that, the landed cost just goes up because of the tariff.
Yeah.
And so that'll drive some inflation in some spots. Bucket number one also, I think, is going to be inflationary because domestic incumbents, because of tariffs, that they have the opportunity to raise their prices to just below what that new tariff rate is for their competition. And I don't blame them for doing that, because they're a rational market participant. If you can sell the same amount or more goods at a higher price, you should be fired if you're not doing that. So
that's right. It's the compelling part of a business.
So in
maximize
both cases,
your margins.
Our concern is that it will be additive to what we already thought, and we talked about this last year. We already thought inflation was going to be a problem in 2025.
Yeah.
We never thought it was going to go to 2%. We never thought it was going to go to 1% or 0%. We felt it was going to be sticky near 3% this year. And so I always love my metaphors. Like, so prior to the election, whether it was President Harris or President Trump 2.0, we felt like they had a fully baked inflation cake that they were going to have to contend with here this year. And I would view tariffs as basically sprinkles on top of what we already thought was going to be a challenging and sticky inflation environment this year. And that's obviously the scenario we find ourselves in now.
So what you're saying is nothing new. Nothing new. This chaos that I referenced just now is sprinklings on is a distraction, is a sprinkling on the cake that is already being baked.
To a certain extent, again, because it is new, and again, it's different, and it's disruptive, and it's chaotic. But again, our inflation forecast, it's not like it was 0% 2 months ago, and it's like, oh, now we think it's going to be 3% because of this year. Again, now what we're trying to evaluate is how much more could it potentially be than 3% because of this. So it is new to a certain extent, but like we felt inflation was going to be a narrative this year, no matter what, that was a challenge. And again, now it's just, could it be a little bit worse than we already thought it was going to be?
And you don't have, ITR does not have a number yet, it doesn't sound like.
Not yet at this point, just because, again, had we tore up our inflation forecast like early last month and the expectation of tariffs, then 24 hours later, they didn't happen. That would have worked out well for us. Then same thing, if we'd done it early this month, tariffs went in place for a day, then they get ripped back. So we're kind of like the business community and a lot of my clients, everyone's kind of waiting to be like, is this going to happen or not?
Yeah.
Are these going to stay in place or not? And so now it's just, again, I don't think that's a particularly appealing environment for confident executive decision-making and investment. If you don't, like I said, like you might not like tariffs, but if you know exactly what they're going to be, at what rate, for how long, you can make decisions.
Right.
If you have no idea what they're going to be 4 hours from now, that's kind of hard. Like that's difficult to stride confidently forth and say, yeah, we're going to do this, or no, we're not going to. It's just like everyone's tightened up now.
How long can business remain in uncertainty? Do you have any examples to share with us of here's an economic time where no one knew what was going to happen and ultimately this combusted, or what happens amidst extended uncertainty?
So, if we look at like confidence indexes from like the Small Business Optimism Index, or I think there's an NFIB, it might be the wrong provider, but business confidence metrics that we leverage as leading indicators on like a rate of change basis or a raw leading indicator basis actually tend to correlate very well with like non-defense capital equipment new orders, which is like your proverbial B2B CapEx data set. So basically, if executives are feeling quite confident, generally that is going to flow forth quite reliably in rising capital expenditure, because they're confident, they're optimistic, they're confident that they're going to be busier in the future, that they know what the regulatory policy landscape is going to look like, and they spend accordingly. And when they're not, they generally don't. So again, the challenge right now is, again, in early March, for the most part, we have January data and a handful of February data points. So the data has not really caught up to what's happened in the last 2 to 4 weeks at this point.
Yeah.
So like what we'll be looking for going forward is like if those all start rolling over and cratering, and basically we start getting quantified rendering of what's currently largely headline-based anxiety, that would make us nervous. Because our view is the economy is going to grow this year. Industrial production is going to do better. Manufacturing is going to do better. CapEx is going to do better. That was our outlook in the fall. That was our outlook in this January. That is still our outlook today. And we view this as a downside risk to that. And we're just waiting on some data to quantify what that downside risk looks like. Consumer metrics are horrible. Consumer sentiment, consumer optimism, they're extremely unreliable. Quite often the consumer, and I don't know if I don't know why, but like quite often the consumer will say that they feel great, but they're not spending like it. The consumer will then, reply in a survey saying that like they feel horrible, but then they'll keep spending.
Right.
So the consumer ones aren't as reliable as like executive surveys, like in, or small biz surveys, where those actually tend to be pretty predictive and high correlative value. The consumer ones they're just not, for whatever reason. They miss plus and minus all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. So, does anyway, you used a term a moment ago, headline anxiety, something like that, just what the news is putting out, creating anxiety in the marketplace. But the underpinnings, what you're telling me is the underpinnings that you're seeing through January, the last valuable data, show growth in the economy. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, that's kind of the I don't know if irony is the right word, but
yeah, I think irony is the word.
it might be. But yeah, the data that we had coming in, for December was good. January was good. January's retail number was
Yeah.
stellar, despite the fact that the headline said it was terrible. I don't need to denigrate a specific publication, but like I saw this headline, it's like January retail sales slump compared to December because of wildfires and cold weather
Yeah.
and political anxiety. And I was like, well, that's interesting. So I pulled it up in our system, and number one, January retail sales always decline relative to December.
Sure.
Because that's just a seasonal.
It's a Christmas bump.
The Newton's fourth law of physics is that January retail outcomes are going to be lower than December, like that. So they could run that headline every January forever if they wanted to. Be like, January declined relative to December. Insert, 3 ominous reasons why, when it's actually just seasonal normality. The question is like, well, how much did it decline? And it was the third mildest decline on record for a data set that goes back almost 100 years.
Yeah. Okay.
It was the third mildest ever. And it was an acceleration relative to January of last year. So by all accounts, it was actually a great number. And that's after 2 years of actually pretty poor retail data in 23, 24. CapEx numbers were starting to tick up. Manufacturing numbers were some of the best that we'd seen since 2023. Industrial product, so a lot of decent numbers coming into this. And again, right now, I'm calling it headline based uncertainty because again, I just don't have the data to bear out that it's real. And again, I might get that in the coming weeks. That when we get February, March, PMI numbers, different leading indicators, optimism, anxiety gauges. Again, it might end up being more than just headlines. But again, I kind of framed it that way just because right now I can't say it is or isn't. We could be here a quarter from now where it's just again an ongoing chaotic headline environment, but the prevailing business community is undisturbed,
trudging
and
away.
They continue to spend. Based on the conversations with my clients, it seems like it's kind of a mixed bag. Again, I have some clients I'd put in the winners bucket where they're excited about this. They're pretty wholly domestically positioned. A lot of their competitors aren't, and they're like, yeah, we've got a better story to take to market than a lot of our competitors, and we're in a pretty good spot.
Yeah.
Others are kind of in the middle where they're like, well, we delevered out of China over the last 7 years, which is what we thought they wanted us to do. But in many cases, we went into Mexico, which is now looking like it wasn't the greatest idea. And then other people are like kind of in the middle where their concern is more like, they're like, we don't have any direct, because you could be like a services business and you're like, I'm not importing or exporting anything.
Right.
But maybe a lot of my clients are. And, what is, so their concern maybe kind of elevates to just like the broad macro view where it's just like, is this going to create enough drag that this is going to end up pulling my business down?
Right.
Or not. So it's, everyone I think has some level of concern at this point. So we'll have to see how acute that ultimately is.
Well, I'm in the service business, as I know you know, and I'm beginning to see my clients who have said, we're going to do this and this and this, have said, well, we're not. We may not. We're not real sure what's going to happen here, Cam. We can't send you the contract yet because we're afraid. We're uncertain. Connor, based on your expertise, I need to slow down. What do you find interesting out there right now? What is our unique time today? What is piquing your interest?
Well, it's tough to pick much other than tariffs at the moment, just because it's so pervasive. But beyond that, I think that a couple of things I found interesting. So the new Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, he's been almost surprisingly candid and forthright in some of his public comments in the last couple of weeks about the economy's addiction to public sector spending, which I would 100% agree with. And you've heard from me for years about our 2030s concerns, our basically untenable fiscal trajectory and public sector spending trajectory. And again, it's been a surprising level of forthrightness in admitting that, acknowledging that, and an admission that taking away the morphine drip of, from the junkie that is, the U.S. economy of public sector spending, is going to hurt, which is almost worrisome, again, in the short term, in that, like, not that I disagree with them, but the fact that, again, kind of going to our earlier comments, like they actually might be playing at a higher level here, where they're acknowledging that we may have some pain coming here, maybe not specific to tariffs, but as it relates to government spending reduction and some of the cuts that they're trying to find, and acknowledging that may actually show up in some weaknesses for some parts of the economy that have grown quite reliant on that spending.
Yeah.
They've also shown, his comments have been that, their concern is very much about 10-year treasury yields, 10-year bond yields, which drive government basically, borrowing costs. It also drives your 30-year fixed rate mortgage for your would-be home buyers.
Right.
And their desire to get that number down. Typically, that number comes down when the economy is in turmoil because it drives a flight to safety, draws some flows out of equities, flows go into bonds, your bond and basically your non-risk asset appetite rises, which again, there could be maybe a method to this madness where they're not all that concerned about a 10-15% drawdown in equity markets because they're trying to drive some flows into bonds to get bond yields down because they have to, because of the fiscal situation they're inheriting, they have to reissue, I think the number is like north of $7 trillion worth of treasuries this year. And they would like rates to be lower when they do that. Because right now, one of the things we talked about last year, and some of the groups you and I work together with is, the debt financing, like interest expense on the current debt level, north of $36 trillion, it's exceeded our defense budget.
Yeah.
It's closing in on $1 trillion. And that number is going to go up and up, particularly with a lot of this reissuance of basically prior old expiring debt at today's higher rates. That's a big problem.
Yeah.
Even before you get to the monster that is entitlements and Social Security and healthcare, that's kind of the lurking monster in the background. So it's been interesting to me that they're talking so openly about those issues that, from whenever you saw me the first time, 7-8 years ago, like that's been on our radar for a long time. Again, our view is that it's too late to alter the path that we're on at this point. But the fact that there's even conversations about it, I think is actually a little bit encouraging.
Encouraging. So are you saying, Connor, that the 2030 prediction that you all have been making for a while may actually be a 2025 prediction?
No, I wouldn't say that. No, we haven't moved that up. We still think it's 2030. But again, basically what I would frame some of the comments we're seeing is maybe some prelim acknowledgement of
this is a problem.
Of when the rubber meets the road.
Yeah.
Because there's been people within the government in small roles, like, because the CBO has been saying for forever that this is a problem, like just, kind of some guy in a suit in the background is like, hey, you guys know that this isn't going to work out well, right? And everyone's like, yeah, whatever. We got other things to worry about.
Yeah.
So to see the head of the Treasury talking about it openly, repeatedly in interviews, I guess is maybe an escalation in my mind of kind of injecting some of our concerns we've had for a decade plus kind of into the mainstream, which has been interesting. So that's caught my eye. Obviously, what we're seeing out of the Department of Government Efficiency and some of those cuts there. And again, I'm sure folks have pretty intense thoughts one way or the other on those items. But again, it's really cutting at the core issue that we've been worried about for 10 plus years, which is that you can't spend trillions of dollars more than you bring in every year forever and just have that work out. Life is not as simple as, you just print enough money and borrow enough money and all your problems go away because, if it was, like, we'd be the Jetsons by now. Like, if it was that simple, and, and obviously we're not, and the world is as dysfunctional as ever, even though, I saw a headline, the other day, like total global indebtedness is like over $200 trillion or something. It's just like, like if that worked, I feel like we'd be in better shape than we are now. And obviously we're not. So it's clear that is also a problem. And again, these are little bites at this point, and we don't think it changes the 2030 math, but it's a start.
What I'm hearing from you is the candor out of the Treasury Department is refreshing to you. I've heard you say that you're still projecting growth this year. I've heard you say that inflation was baked into the recipe last year. It will be baked in again this year, but it may be a different number. In other words, I hear confidence out of you. Is that the right word? I don't hear fear in your voice. I don't hear, as I hear in my my colleagues is I don't fear and worry and anxiety. Does anybody really know what's going on? Do the people who are pulling these strings know what they're doing, or is it a seat of the pants thing? I'm getting from you a different feeling. Am I right?
Kind of. I'd call it caveated confidence. It's, because, if we find ourselves 6 weeks from now where, we do go to 25 points on Canada, Mexico, we throw in 25 points on Europe, maybe we add more on China, we pull in South Korea and Japan, and they all respond. That could put us in a different situation. Where we at right now with now 20% on China, 25 points on steel and aluminum, I don't think that that's fatal to our growth outlook, even though that's not our preferred path. Again, in our perfect Austrian economic worldview at ITR, which is, we're free market economists. Like, we would prefer the government to get out of the way. We would prefer that the world trades freely and fairly, and that there's no tariffs anywhere. Some countries do some things better. Some other countries do other things better, but we all trade freely and fairly. And net, we're all optimized for it. The birds are chirping,
right?
The sun is shining, like, end scene. Like, we also understand that's not the world that we live in. It's a lot messier than that. So while this, again, this is not our preferred path forward, would not be this dramatic global escalation. But what we see so far, we don't feel is immediately fatal. Again, it's going to be more disruptive for some industries than others. But for now, it's, like I said, the data coming into this was improving. The leading indicators were improving. A number for your audience to know, coming into this right now, disposable income growth is a really important one. So inflation adjusted disposable income growth, excluding transfer receipts. So when you exclude unemployment and government payments to individuals, like, if you just look at earners in this country, their wage growth is at 2.8% right now, less inflation. So, like, when you look, so their actual wage growth number is a lot higher than that, but when you peel off inflation, it's growing at about 2.8%.
Yeah.
The average over the last decade is 2.7%.
Oh,
so that is a perfectly, it's not like the best number we've ever seen, but like, that number, the economy can grow with that number.
It's an acceptable number considering the environment.
Number. So when it goes back to, like, if, and probably more like when we change our inflation forecast based on what we're seeing based on tariffs, that's what we're going to be watching. We currently are targeting inflation right around just north of 3% for this year all in. If it ends up being 3.7% because of tariffs, because again, those sprinkles on top, it adds, a few extra basis points here or there. I don't think that kills us, because I think that inflation adjusted DPI number would remain at an acceptable level to continue to nudge the economy forward.
Yeah.
If that number ends up being 6.7%, then we quite likely have problems.
Yeah.
Because that tidal wave probably overtakes wage growth, and we get back into the situation that we were in like 2022 and 2023, where that DPI growth rate number basically went to zero.
Yeah.
Because the inflation monster was eating all wage growth. And that's why the economy in a lot of areas struggled over the last 2 years, is that all the pent-up COVID savings were evaporated, the COVID stimulus was spent, interest rates went from 0 to 5%, mortgage rates went from 3 to 8%, and wage growth went to 0%, or quite near. And that's why retail struggled, freight and logistics struggled, manufacturing struggled, housing went into a recession, multifamily's in a recession. Basically everything but GDP said that we have a problem here. GDP didn't, because government spending is included in GDP.
Yeah.
And we did enough public sector spending to override that. So I think we could find ourselves where, like, on paper, maybe GDP looks worse this year, but a lot of businesses and consumers actually feel a little bit better than they felt over the last couple of years. So I think, like, that's the number, 2.8. If we stay in the mid 2% range, I think we're okay. If tariffs and escalation and this mess really goes worst case, and that erodes to nothing or negative, then, like, if that number goes negative, you're getting a recession. Like, that's just what happens. And,
No
and
way
even
around
if you
that.
flirt with the zero line, and it's pretty simple, right? Like, people try to make economics really complicated. It's like, if people have more money in their pocket and they go out and spend it, the economy is going to be okay. And if they don't, it won't.
Yeah.
And right now we're in an okay spot. And I don't see, other than like specific client cases from some of our consulting clients, I keep going to that steel product manufacturer, like, they probably have upside in their forecast,
right,
based on what's happened. In the aggregate, we view this as a downside risk in pretty much everywhere else. Like, upside risk for inflation, downside risk for the broader economy, the consumer. And the question is how much? Does it make the growth year that we thought was coming still be a growth year, but maybe a little bit lower, possibly? Or do we have to take that entirely off the table? And we're just not there yet. So, when I get to see you in person in
April.
7-8 weeks.
Yeah, late April.
Hopefully we have those answers at this point. Unfortunately, what I was telling my clients 8 weeks ago in early January, I was like, we're going to know a lot more in 8 weeks. And then here we are 8 weeks later.
That sounds like
I don't know nearly as much as I wish that I did on the tariff front. And I had a consulting call yesterday, and again, I'm having to attach, which I hate doing. I absolutely hate being the two-handed economist, where it's like I have to caveat everything.
Yeah.
It's like we're waiting on a little bit of data and hopefully some consistency on this policy,
right?
So that we can make an honest effort at quantifying it. But it's we're already deep into we've changed our aluminum price forecast, our domestic steel pricing forecast. It's like, so the ones that are in place and have stayed there, we can work with that.
Yeah.
What we can't work with is we get the bees in the hive buzzing on Canada and Mexico tariffs, and then 24 hours later it's like, well, actually that's not happening. It's like it's not helping us, it's not helping business. It's everyone's kind of waiting to see how this is going to go.
What industries, this is an unfair question, what are the sleeper industries during tariff wars? You've mentioned steel a number of times, steel and aluminum. Anybody that produces steel and aluminum in the U.S. is expecting a bumper year. I'm thinking about selling my services. Where do I go for the target-rich audience right now? Is it steel and aluminum? Is it say, hey, call on those clients of mine again to say, hey, these tariffs are really going to benefit you, and I know you have money to spend, so look at what I've got. What else is out there? Where else should people like me go to find industries that are going to benefit? So we outside of steel and aluminum.
I mean, I think the basket's pretty small at this point because, again, for every steel and aluminum product manufacturer domestically, there's 100 companies that have to purchase steel and aluminum to make their products, which is, again, why we typically argue against tariffs. It's like, okay, well, if we help this one industry, what about everyone else that is, like a lawnmower manufacturer in Wisconsin that is, got like a 20% steel content in their product that is now up 25 points on their cost structure that then they have to pass through. And, the consumer at Home Depot has to decide if they can afford, the lawnmower that's maybe a couple $100 more expensive than it otherwise would have been. It
trickles down. Yep. Yeah. And even the domestic one is going to likely raise their prices to just below the tariff prices.
Yep, exactly. So it's, so I don't know if I could isolate on an industry that,
thrives during tariff times.
Yeah. Again, it'll be kind of shades of gray. It's just like, because one of the questions I ask all my clients is like, tell me the world as you see it, as it relates to your supply chain. Again, they're like, we've got some exposure, but maybe it's a little bit less than our competitors. So maybe, shades of gray, like we're a less ugly duckling here in the market than competitor A, B, or C that is heavier exposed to Mexico or China or Europe or whatever it is.
Yeah. So are you, do I get the impression, Connor, and I'll be candid with you, you've made me feel a whole lot better in our conversation about what's going on out there, particularly with your thoughts that maybe somebody does see this from a level which you and I cannot, or that you cannot, and they're pulling some strings that will have long-term gain, versus just simply retaliatory, simply what looks like childish behavior. Are you sitting on the sidelines with your arms crossed laughing, going, watch it, look at all these people running around getting crazy, it's not all that bad?
I wouldn't say I'm laughing. It's like with most things, it's like reality is typically in the middle. Like, proponents tell you it's the best thing ever. Naysayers say it's the worst thing ever. It's typically at neither end of those extremes.
Yeah.
Again, I view it as a negative. Again, I don't want Canada to hate us. I don't want.
Have you seen the vitriol coming out of Canada for the U.S. right now?
It's.
And you live closer than I do. If they come over the border, you're the first one.
I'm a border state. I could be on the front lines here soon.
Yeah.
On how it goes. But it's just, because like I get like college buddies that are texting me and like they didn't even know what a tariff was 2 months ago.
Right.
Now they're armchair experts and trying to tell me
that sounds like me.
Why it's like the worst thing in the world. And I'm like, okay, like while I agree with you, it's just like I've been advising these risks. Like I do this for a living and I've been doing it before you decided to care 2 months ago.
Right.
And, so that is a little irritating to me sometimes, where it's just like, you're saying what you're reading online. And again, while you might technically be correct in not liking them, I don't even think you know why you're not supposed to like them. You're just you're just riding the wave at this point. And it's
you are. I've written your quote down. Headline based uncertainty. You are being driven by headline based uncertainty, friend. You don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, but one of the risks that we talked about is like, you can talk yourself into a recession. Like, if not you specifically, but like in the aggregate, like, because now it's, you can get that kind of, the ball can start rolling downhill and get tough to stop, which I think is obviously a risk here. Because there's the historical comp from the worst cases, the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act back in the early 1930s. At the onset of the Great Depression, as countries were starting to slide and things were really deteriorating, the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, which was a broadly bipartisan effort, by the way, back in I think it was 1932, maybe. It was basically a huge tariff act. Like, we're going to apply tariffs to all of our trading partners, and then they responded in kind with tariffs of their own. And it actually exacerbated the Great Depression, because global trade flows cratered, and basically it was kind of your prisoner's dilemma, where we went to that quadrant where it ends up being worst case for both parties, all parties involved. So there is historical precedent for this to play out quite poorly, like as poorly as we've ever seen before.
Yeah.
So again, I don't like tariffs. I do not want the world to go in this direction. I don't think that this will optimize our outcome going forward. But we're not at this point, again, ready to just condemn what coming into this we thought was going to be a reasonably good year. Again, we didn't think we were going to kick the doors off from a growth rate standpoint this year, but we thought 25 would be a little bit better than 2024. 2026 would be a little bit better than 2025, and just some modest growth going forward. And we just haven't seen enough yet that we're ready to just say, we're done, we're cooked, because we put some tariffs in place, even if we don't like them. We're not there yet. We could get there in a month or 6 weeks or 8 weeks. But we got to fly by our instruments at ITR. Again, that's why we're so successful, is we're apolitical, we're unbiased, we're emotionless. We just look at the data, and we need some runs of data here. And I pulled up some weekly data points, ones that we actually used back during COVID quite a bit, because the speed at which things were happening in real time was so fast that our traditional reporting, where in February you get January data, in March you start to get February data, in April we're going to get March data, kind of as you alluded to, we're at kind of our COVID anniversary here 5 years later,
right,
when things really started to go sideways. So I pulled up a couple weekly metrics, weekly economic index, Johnson Red Book weekly retail data through the first week of March, totally fine. No concerns there.
Yeah.
Weekly economic index numbers starting to see a tiny bit of softening, but nothing mission critical. So again, we'll have to see how that plays out in the coming weeks. But whether it's trailing monthly data points or some of these weekly flash data points, nothing's telling me to jump off the cliff yet, which is why we're not telling our clients to. So we'll just have to see how it plays out. Again, I would love to get to a point where, and I think this goes to just broader diplomacy on any issue, whether it's tariffs or otherwise, you have to give both parties an off-ramp where both leaders can kind of go back to their side of the border and look like they won.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you leave it where it looks like, if you leave it as a zero-sum game where I won and I kicked in the teeth of the other guy or gal, the other prime minister or leader or whatever, that puts them in a corner where they almost have to go the mutually assured destruction route.
Yeah.
Because they're I'm better off polling well with a destructive policy than doing maybe what's best or least destructive and then getting destroyed politically, domestically. Because you have to think about all these incentive structures and all this, where it's because in a vacuum, we have the leverage. Canada needs our demand more than we need Canadian products.
Right.
Just the math is not in their favor or anyone's, because again, that's the position we put ourselves in as the U.S. economy, that everyone needs the U.S. consumer more than U.S. businesses need the European consumer in the aggregate. Again, for specific businesses, it might be the opposite.
Right.
But again, if we put it at a point where, again, that leader has to bend the knee and get their teeth kicked in at the negotiating table and then take that home, like they're probably not going to do it. They're like my polling like is bumping fighting, even though this in the long run actually might be damaging to my constituents and their businesses should it go this route. But it's just like,
pride.
I want to get reelected. So I'd rather get reelected in a recession than get ousted dodging one, doing the right thing in the short term, which I think just goes to like all kind of like political incentive structure. And part of the reason like our 2030 outlook exists is because it's so much short-term decision making with an indifference towards the long-term view, because we're in this 2 to 4 year, cycle that kind of sets you up to make myopic, poor short-term decisions.
So this is an unfair question. Can I ask a personal question?
Sure.
You can't see his face, folks, but he looked a little. Your wife wasn't pregnant 9 months ago. How do you feel about the world your son or future son or daughter will inherit any day now? Are you confident or unconfident? Do you like the future for your child? I've got 4 myself. And what do you think about, when you look at through your child's eyes and all this stuff that we've talked about, what do you see?
I'm confident. I don't fear the future. I want to have kids. I've loved being a dad with my son. Can't wait for our daughter to arrive here in the next few days. We're hoping to have another one after that. I think my generation's particularly guilty of this, millennials and probably Gen Z, is like, we're so jaded and negative with the way that we view the world. And it's just not that bad. Like, you might not like the president or the prior president. You might not like so-and-so, but it's just like, there's never been a better time to be alive.
Connor, what an extraordinary comment. Truly an extraordinary comment.
Well, it's just, there's this odd romanticization of like a world that never existed. They're just like, oh, like, capitalism's evil or the president's evil or whatever. And like the 40-hour work week is unfair. It's just like, what did you think people did 300 years ago?
Yeah.
They spent all day toiling to survive, to cut and dry timber for the long winter, to store and can foods, and to like every day was a legitimate fight to exist on this planet. And like, do you think like the feudal peasantry in like 1500s Europe, like they had it really good? Like, what are we talking about here? Like, it's like everyone fought for survival every single day. And you think about where we're at today, it's, obviously there's always been uncertainty, but it's just, I don't know. I struggle to, get on board with like the world's going to end economically or environmentally or otherwise, and to just give up, to not enjoy the life of parenthood and having children. Cause like, I don't know what the heck, what am I going to do with myself? I'm just gonna go to bars and like doom post online for the next 50 years till I croak. Like what am I going to do? Like, I'm going to have kids. I'm going to hopefully raise them as best I can. And hopefully I feel like there's going to be a world for them to operate in and do so successfully. And I'm not giving up. I'm not tapping out. I'm going down with the ship, and hopefully it doesn't come to that. But
I love it, Connor. I absolutely love your answer. And you have perspective in your answer. You're an educated man with your economics background, and what I can tell is a good and doting father. And you've chosen to see this cup as half full of good stuff. Even the turmoil that we're in right now, your cup is half full, not only half full, but half full of good stuff. And my friend, that's the message that I needed right now. I'm in a different chapter than you. My youngest are 18, and I wonder what they're going to step into here. And we got 4, the youngest being 18-year-old twins. What is the world they're going to step into now? I don't regret anything, but it's you've offered perspective today and some hope, quite frankly. Though my clients are saying things like, we can't make decisions right now, Cam, things are uncertain, and I'm worried about my next 6 months. I'm glad to hear your view is what it is. You've given me a boost, my friend, and I can't. Your call today and this recording has come at the most optimal time for me. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me on. It's always great catching up, and I'll look forward to seeing you in person here in just under a couple months, and with some baby pictures in tow, I'm sure. So.
I'm sure. Send me some baby pictures, because at the beginning of every conference, I list every speaker that's upcoming and their bio, or not their bio, but their photo. And if there's one you can share, I'll save the bulk for you and your presentation. Here's what's happened to Connor since we last saw him in Mexico. So I'll see you in Colorado Springs.
All righty, Kim. Sounds good.
Connor, thank you so much for your time. Connor Lokar, folks, you can find him online at ITR Economics. You can find him on LinkedIn. I'll post links to him. And ITR, Connor, confirm this with me. You put out a free newsletter on a regular basis?
Yeah, we have tons of free content on our website. We have blog posts. We have many trends talks. We have a YouTube channel. So lots of free content on there for folks to stay in check with us. My corny line I always like to share is like, let ITR be your three-letter network as far as the economy is concerned, and you can go back to your favorites for all the other stuff. Yeah. They're not doing you any favors on the economic reporting front. I can promise you that.
Yeah, you're probably right, and it's a message that I need to hear myself to figure out where to get my content. Yeah, doom and gloom sells, and I'm afraid I'm a customer of it, and I need to check my ways. Connor, thank you so much, my friend. I will see you in a couple of months.
Sounds good.
We'll be right back, folks. Hi, I'm Cam Marston. Many business leaders like you are facing declining sales, high turnover, low morale, all because of poor communication. That's why I created the Generational Insights Communications Academy. The Academy trains your leaders to communicate effectively with anyone in any situation, helping you build the thriving company you deserve. Learn more and enroll today at cammarston.com/GICA. That's Connor Lokar with ITR Economics, everyone. I will put links to ITR in the show notes, and you can go to their websites and sign up for those. Their information, as he said, there's a lot of headline stuff that you'll be sent that'll cause you pain and fear and worry that you may be on those email lists, and I am, and I read them, which is what you heard in my voice as Connor and I began our conversation. And then there's the content that ITR puts out, which is a little bit more sober, let's say. And I'm going to take my own advice here and listen to that stuff. Connor's a great friend. He's a good guy. You can tell he knows his content very well. And his hope for the economy this year is not as grim as what I thought it would be, frankly. And that's great news. Gives me a little bit more encouragement to continue to do what I do for the next little while at least. So anyway, that'll wrap us for this week's, folks. This is What's Working with Cam Marston, Workplace, Workforce, Marketplace Trends. Now only a podcast, not the radio show. Just had another conversation about that a moment ago. And would love to hear from you. If you've got guests you think that I need to know about, send them my way. Cam, C-A-M, @cammarston.com. Have a good week, everybody.